Payroll owed $600. Not because I quit, not because I sued the company, not because of some accounting mistake. They simply stopped paying us. The first Friday, HR called it a payroll delay. The second Friday, they apologized again. The third Friday, they promised we'd all be paid next Friday. By the fourth Friday, I had borrowed money from my younger sister just to cover my mortgage. The part that still makes me angry isn't the money. It's that every single morning, management acted like nothing was wrong. Department meetings continued. New projects were announced. Managers congratulated teams for hitting quarterly goals. Meanwhile, almost everyone in the building was secretly refreshing their banking apps every couple of hours. Nothing ever showed up. Then, one Monday morning, I noticed something that didn't make sense. Half of the executive parking spaces were empty, not one or two. Half. At first, I assumed they were traveling. I didn't realize those empty parking spaces were the first sign that our company had already begun collapsing. I had worked for Horizon Freight Logistics for almost 5 years. The company wasn't famous, but it had contracts with several national retailers and employed around 300 people across 2 warehouses and 1 corporate office outside Dallas. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid well. My performance reviews had always been solid. I'd been promoted twice. The company even paid quarterly bonuses whenever our regional shipping targets were exceeded. That's why missing one paycheck didn't immediately scare me. Payroll systems fail sometimes. Banks have technical problems. It happens. Around 10 that morning, HR sent a company-wide email. Open quote, "Due to an unexpected payroll processing issue, employee paychecks have been delayed. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Payroll is expected to be completed by next Friday." Close quote. People complained for a few minutes. Someone joked that at least we'd all have another reason to hate Mondays. By lunchtime, everyone had gone back to work. Nobody imagined that email would become the beginning of the worst month of our careers. The following Friday came. Still nothing. Another email arrived. Another apology. Another promise. Next Friday. That phrase quickly became a joke around the office. Whenever someone asked about lunch, next Friday. Need approval for vacation? Next Friday. Someone even taped a sticky note that read, "Next Friday fixes everything," above the coffee machine. People laughed, mostly because the alternative was admitting we were starting to panic. I still believed everything would work itself out. After all, companies don't just stop paying employees. At least that's what I thought. By the third missed paycheck, the atmosphere inside the office had completely changed. People weren't chatting before meetings anymore. The break room was almost silent. Everyone's phone buzzed constantly, not with text messages from friends, with overdraft alerts, credit card reminders, mortgage notifications, late payment warnings. One of the customer service representatives quietly admitted she'd started delivering food after work just to keep up with rent. A warehouse supervisor confessed he'd borrowed money from his parents for the first time since college. Another employee had canceled his daughter's summer camp because he couldn't afford it anymore. Nobody was buying lunch. The vending machines stayed full. Coffee pods disappeared because they were free. Everything else stopped. Despite all that, management kept smiling. Every Tuesday morning, our COO hosted the usual operations meeting, PowerPoint presentations, sales forecasts, customer satisfaction numbers. He never mentioned payroll, not once. Someone finally raised a hand. "When are we getting paid?" The room went completely silent. The COO forced a smile. "I've been assured it's just a temporary banking issue." Someone asked another question. "Who assured you?" He ignored it. 5 minutes later, the meeting ended early. That was the first time I felt something wasn't just delayed. Something was being hidden. And once I started paying attention, the small details became impossible to ignore. Another question. "Who assured you?" He ignored it. 5 minutes later, the meeting ended early. That was the first time I felt something wasn't just delayed. Something was being hidden. And once I started paying attention, the small details became impossible to ignore. The first thing was the coffee service. Every Monday morning, a local company delivered fresh coffee beans, creamers, bottled water, and snacks for every floor. They hadn't shown up all week. By Thursday, the shelves were empty. Someone joked that maybe they hadn't been paid either. Nobody laughed. Then the cleaning crew stopped coming. Trash cans overflowed. Bathrooms ran out of paper towels. The carpets near the warehouse entrance became stained with muddy footprints that stayed there for days. It didn't feel like the company I had worked for over the last 5 years anymore. It felt abandoned. Yet every afternoon, another email arrived from HR. We appreciate your pace. We understand your concerns. We expect payroll to resume next Friday. Always next Friday. Around that time, rumors started spreading faster than official emails. One person claimed the company had lost its biggest customer. Another said our bank had frozen all business accounts. Someone else insisted the CEO was negotiating the sale of the company. Nobody knew what to believe. Management refused to answer questions. HR stopped picking up the phone. Payroll voicemail was permanently full. Even internal emails began bouncing back with automatic replies saying the recipient was unavailable. I tried focusing on my work. There wasn't much else I could do. Until one afternoon, one of our largest shipping clients called me directly. I just wanted to confirm whether your warehouse is still operating next month. I frowned. Of course it is. There was a long pause. That's strange, he finally said. We've already been contacted by another company asking to take over your account. I felt my stomach tighten. What company? I don't remember the name, he replied. But they said several members of your executive team were joining them. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my monitor. Nobody inside the company had mentioned executives leaving. Not once. That afternoon, I walked past the executive offices. Several nameplates had already been removed from the doors. The offices weren't locked. They were simply empty. Computers gone. Family photos gone. Even the framed certificates had disappeared. It looked as if whoever had worked there had packed up in the middle of the night. I stopped one of the administrative assistants. Where's Mark? She hesitated. He resigned. What about Lisa? She resigned too. And the CFO? She looked around before lowering her voice. I don't think we're supposed to talk about it. Then she hurried away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. Executives don't all resign within the same week unless they know something everyone else doesn't. The next morning, I arrived at work almost an hour early. The parking lot was nearly empty. As I walked toward the building, I noticed two men loading boxes from the finance department into an unmarked truck. Not office furniture, file boxes. Dozens of them. One of the boxes tipped over. Folders spilled onto the pavement. One page slid across the asphalt and stopped near my feet. I bent down to hand it back. That's when I accidentally read the heading across the top. Cash flow forecast. Below it was a single line highlighted in yellow. Available operating cash, 4 days. I froze. 4 days. Not 4 weeks. Not 4 months. 4 days. One of the men quickly snatched the paper from my hand. That's confidential. I nodded and walked away. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd just seen. If that document was real, the company hadn't been waiting for payroll to clear. It had simply run out of money. And if that was true, everyone promising us next Friday had already known there might never be another payday at all. The company hadn't been waiting for payroll to clear. It had simply run out of money. And if that was true, everyone promising us next Friday had already known there might never be another payday at all. I spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had happened. I answered emails, joined meetings, updated spreadsheets. But my mind kept going back to those 4 words. Available operating cash. 4 days. If the company only had enough money to survive another 4 days, then payroll wasn't delayed. It was impossible. For the first time since all this started, I wasn't worried about my missing paycheck. I was worried about walking into work one morning and finding the doors locked. Around 3 that afternoon, another email from HR landed in everyone's inbox. The subject line read, Payroll update. The entire office stopped working. I could actually hear phones buzzing across the room as everyone opened the email at the same time. It said exactly what I expected. Open quote. We appreciate your continued patience. We anticipate payroll will be processed next Friday. Thank you for your understanding. Close quote. Someone behind me laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the kind of laugh people make when they're completely out of hope. Another employee stood up, crumpled a printed copy of the email, threw it into the trash, grabbed his backpack, and walked out. Nobody tried to stop him. By the end of the day, 6 people had resigned. Not because they had another job, because they couldn't afford to keep working for free. The following Tuesday, something happened that confirmed every fear I'd been trying to ignore. Our warehouse received instructions to stop accepting new inventory from 3 major customers. No explanation. Just temporarily suspend incoming shipments. That single email created complete chaos. Forklift operators stood around with nothing to unload. Truck drivers were turned away at the gate. Customer service phones started ringing nonstop. Clients wanted answers. We didn't have any. Management told us to say there was a temporary scheduling adjustment. Another lie. By lunchtime, employees had stopped pretending everything was normal. Groups gathered in hallways. People whispered outside conference rooms. Even supervisors admitted they didn't know what was happening anymore. Then I saw Melissa from HR walking quickly toward the executive floor. She wasn't carrying her laptop. She was carrying a cardboard box. Inside were dozens of employee files. She looked exhausted. As she passed me, I asked quietly, "Melissa, are we going to get paid?" She stopped. For a second, it looked like she wanted to answer. Really answer. Instead, she forced a tired smile. I wish I knew. It was the first honest thing anyone from HR had said in almost a month. That evening, I stayed late to finish a customer report. Around 7 o'clock, the office was almost empty. As I walked toward the parking lot, I noticed lights still on in one of the executive conference rooms upstairs. The blinds weren't completely closed. Curiosity got the better of me. From the parking lot, I could see silhouettes moving inside. The CEO, the CFO, 2 attorneys I'd never seen before, and Melissa from HR. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody looked optimistic. Folders covered the conference table. One attorney pushed a document across to the CEO. He signed it without even reading the last page. Melissa buried her face in her hands. 10 minutes later, everyone left through the private executive exit instead of the main lobby. The next morning, Melissa didn't come to work. Neither did the CFO. Their email accounts had been deactivated. When employees tried calling HR, every extension went straight to voicemail. For the first time in 5 years, there wasn't a single person in the building who could answer one simple question. When are we getting paid? Then, at exactly 9:17 a.m., every employee received an email from the CEO. The subject line was only 3 words, an important update. 9:17 a.m., every employee received an email from the CEO. The subject line was only 3 words, an important update, an important. I don't think anyone in the building actually breathed while opening that email. For a moment, there was hope. Maybe they'd finally secured a loan, maybe payroll had gone through, maybe this nightmare was finally over. Instead, the first sentence read, open quote, effective immediately, Horizon Freight Logistics has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, close quote. The office went completely silent. Some people stared at their screens. Others read the email over and over as if the words might change. Then someone across the room quietly asked, "What happens to our paychecks?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Less than 5 minutes later, employees began leaving their desks. Nobody told them to. They just stood up, one after another. Within 20 minutes, almost the entire office had walked downstairs to the main lobby. Outside, the parking lot kept filling up. Warehouse employees had heard the news. Drivers came back from deliveries. Outside, the parking lot kept filling up. Warehouse employees had heard the news. Drivers came back from deliveries. Former employees who had already quit that week showed up after hearing rumors online. By noon, hundreds of people were standing outside the front entrance. Some were angry. Some looked completely lost. One older warehouse worker kept repeating, "I've got 3 kids." Another woman was crying while talking to her landlord on the phone. "I just need a few more days." A young guy from shipping sat on the curb with his head in his hands. "I can't even buy groceries." I had never seen so many people from the same company look so defeated. Around 1 o'clock, several members of HR finally came outside, including Melissa. She looked nothing like the confident HR manager we'd known. She hadn't slept. You could see it in her face. Employees immediately surrounded them. "When are we getting paid? Where's the CEO? Why did you keep telling us next Friday? Did you know this was coming?" Questions came from every direction. Melissa waited until everyone became just quiet enough to hear her. Her voice was shaking. I'm sorry." Someone shouted back, "Sorry doesn't pay my rent." Nobody disagreed. Melissa took a deep breath before continuing. I know you're angry. I'd be angry too. We didn't know everything at the beginning, but once we realized how serious the situation was, she stopped. For a second, it looked like she was trying not to cry. We reported everything to senior management. They told us negotiations were still happening. They believed funding would arrive. Every week, they told us to tell you. She couldn't finish the sentence. The crowd answered for her. Next Friday. Several people laughed bitterly. Others simply looked away. Melissa continued. Yesterday, after the bankruptcy filing became official, we contacted the bankruptcy trustee and the state labor authorities regarding unpaid wages. The remaining company funds are now under court supervision. Our goal is to make sure employees receive as much of their unpaid wages as legally possible. Someone near the front yelled, "So how much are we getting?" I honestly don't know yet. It wasn't the answer anyone wanted, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like the truth. No fake promises, no next Friday, just uncertainty. Over the following 3 weeks, we received regular updates from the bankruptcy trustee instead of company management. Every update sounded the same. Assets were being evaluated, creditors were filing claims, employees would receive for a portion of unpaid wages under the bankruptcy process, but there wasn't enough money to make everyone whole. Eventually, I received my payment. I stared at the amount for almost a full minute. It wasn't $9,600. It wasn't even close. After taxes, adjustments, and the limited funds available, I recovered only a fraction of what the company owed me. The money helped, but it didn't erase what had happened. 5 years of loyalty had ended with 4 words. Next Friday. Looking back now, I don't blame Melissa anymore. She was standing between hundreds of frightened employees and executives who kept insisting help was coming. She delivered the messages. She didn't make the decisions. The people who made those decisions were long gone before the rest of us understood the truth. A few months later, I found another job. Ironically, my first paycheck arrived exactly on a Friday. When the bank notification appeared on my phone, I didn't smile. I just sat there for a moment staring at the screen. Because I realized something. Before Horizon collapsed, I had never once checked whether my paycheck had arrived. I simply assumed it would. Now, even years later, every Friday morning I still open my banking app before I do anything else. Old habits disappear, but some scars don't. Job. Ironically, my first paycheck arrived exactly on a Friday. When the bank notification appeared on my phone, I didn't smile. I just sat there for a moment staring at the screen. Because I realized something. Before Horizon collapsed, I had never once checked whether my paycheck had arrived. I simply assumed it would. Now, even years later, every Friday morning I still open my banking app before I do anything else. Old habits disappear, but some scars don't. Old habits disappear, but some scars don't.